The Olympics are coming up, and do you know what would make this even more exciting? Video games, of course. There have been talks about eSports joining the Olympic Games. However, not all eSports are created equal. And today we'll be looking at the best games to include as well as some of the worst. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to The Gamer for more exciting gaming content. Now, without further ado, here are 10 eSports that should be in the Olympics and 5 that shouldn't. Dota 2. Perhaps we should start this list with the single biggest esport event in gaming, Dota 2. Every year, Dota 2 has its own tournament, the International. In this event, hundreds of players from around the world compete in teams to play this massive MOBA powerhouse. And this is not just some cheap event live streamed from a convention center either. This event is millions of dollars on the line. The last International had a total prize pool of $24 million. Cha-ching! So to put it lightly, the International is a big deal, but it could be made even better if it took place in one of the massive indoor complexes for the Olympic Games. Aside from the sheer volume of players Dota brings in, the game is extremely skill-oriented with thousands of variables and moves that could spell out victory or defeat. Not to mention the fact a fight in Dota is comparable to a hockey brawl in terms of adrenaline-pumping action and tenacity. In short, if MOBAs are let into the Olympics, Dota 2 would be the perfect one. CSGO. If we're going to talk about one of the most popular esports in the field, we have to talk about CSGO, or Counter-Strike Global Offensive for the uninitiated.
But we are initiated, aren't we?
After just 6 years, it has become one of the biggest first-person shooter games on the market. Year after year, it decimates nearly every first-person shooter in terms of active players and community. In fact, CSGO has many large-scale tournaments for years, and it's second to only Dota 2 in terms of prize pool and audience size. However, the fact that CSGO has been featured on major TV sports stations is a sign esports is becoming accepted by a larger audience. So if an entity like the Olympic Games were to bring on something like CSGO, it already has a recognizable brand. Ah, the power of a brand. This would make the transition from esports to real sports easier, as well as bring in large waves of new viewers to the games. League of Legends. While Dota may have the largest esports tournament in gaming, League of Legends has almost twice as many active players and has been featured on major sports TV stations like ESPN. So what makes League of Legends viable enough to be considered when Dota 2 has a bigger tournament and higher skill ceiling? Well, League of Legends might beat out Dota 2 in brand recognition and marketability. While the Olympic Games might be primarily a test of skill in a sport, it is also a huge business venture with sponsorship deals and advertisers. So, with the brand recognition of League of Legends, they could bring in a larger demographic. Now, of course, being a professional League of Legends player takes an enormous amount of skill and practice, but compared to Dota, it's a slightly simpler game. So in this instance, we think it's acceptable for League of Legends to be an Olympic sport for having a wider appeal, while also still a pretty high level of skill involved. Street Fighter. If boxing and wrestling get to be in the Olympics, then fighting games should be a no-brainer, right? With its long history in gaming and the worldwide appeal of the franchise, Street Fighter would make an excellent addition to the Olympics. If you need to be convinced, we'll be happy to give our reasoning. For starters, the degree of skill is there. Players are given an even playing field every game, and the sole determining factor in winning is timing, execution, and good old-fashioned skill. Players spend hours a day memorizing combos, counters, and counting frames in order to hone their craft and deepen their understanding of the game. Now we know not all Street Fighter games are the same, so we'll leave it a bit open-ended and say any one of them could be made into a full-fledged Olympic event, from the very first arcade to the most recent Street Fighter V. Rocket League. So what is better than soccer? Well, if you live in the US, you'll probably say literally anything, but if you live outside the US, you will say nothing. However, what if you could combine soccer or football, for those of you who insist on the proper name, and racing? Well, you would have Rocket League. Now this fact surprised us, but Rocket League, the game no one is really good at, has leagues and tournaments. Perhaps this is the most out of left field game for consideration when you factor in the active player base and relative obscurity compared to other games on this list. Still, with all things considered, Rocket League brings a fair amount of skill and scrutiny and has a fair amount of viewers to warrant it being included in the games. Besides, with all those cars, you know sponsors would want to put their advertisements on them. Starcraft. Considered by many to be one of the greatest RTS games in gaming history, Starcraft and Starcraft 2 has taken the world stage, like Dota, with their own international-like tournament. While most popular in Korea and other Asian countries, the Starcraft World Champion Series has players from around the globe face off for huge prize pools and the usual fame and glory. With the global reach the Olympics have, we may see a more diverse player pool. This can be applied to almost all the games on this list, but with a huge boost onto the mainstream stage comes a large influx of interest in players. While some veterans may see this as a negative, it does have some benefits, one of which is added longevity for your game. With this wider pool of players, the possibilities are endless for the future of StarCraft. Super Smash Bros. Here is a franchise that defied genres. While it may have been designed as a party game, Super Smash Bros. Has evolved into one of the biggest fighting games out there. While the competitive Smash Bros. Scene is fairly young compared to other fighting games, it's no doubt a thriving and active community, and it's growing every year. With the release of Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, the game has seen unheard of levels of competitive play, with tournaments taking place at conventions across the country. Now, surely the metagame can change over time depending on which version of the game you're gonna play. However, the most popular versions of Smash Bros. Are Melee and Wii U. Now you might be thinking, at least for Melee, how the meta changes with a largely stagnant game. Well, here's where something like the Olympics comes in. The deciding factor on what shapes the meta is the amount of players playing it. Tekken. You might be asking yourself why we would put another fighting game franchise on this list. Well, we think there's enough of a difference between Tekken, Street Fighter, and Super Smash Bros. To warrant separate entries.
Plus, we're in charge of writing this stuff, so back off.
Well, you might have a follow-up question like, well, what's the difference between these games? And the answer is a lot. To be more specific, while Street Fighter relies on a lot of super moves and gauges, Tekken rarely has gauges except on the life bar, and the combos rely more on juggling with initiators and a lot of variety. Also, we probably should have put this first. Tekken is a 3D fighting game while Street Fighter exists as a 2D game. So Tekken brings a whole nother dimension to the table, along with more grounded fighting style relying less on super and special moves and more on martial arts. Team Fortress 2. To be perfectly blunt, Team Fortress 2 is what Overwatch tried to be. A team-based first-person shooter with a cast of different classes with various strengths and weaknesses. So where did Overwatch go wrong? Well, we can talk more about it later on in the video, but for now we need to discuss the importance of team composition and the mechanics of Team Fortress 2. The reason this game works as an esport is because it falls into the category of easy to learn, impossible to master kind of game. It's a game where everyone is given equal footing, and the only determining factor in whether you win or lose is the amount of hats you have. We mean the skill and amount of practice you put into the game. Yeah, that's right. Team Fortress 2 has been shifting more towards competitive play in recent years, and after surviving this long, we would love to see it join the ranks of the Olympics. World of Warcraft. We decided to save the best for last. Okay, while it might not be the best, we do think it deserves a spot on this list as our last great game for the Olympics.
And now the country of orcs.
During our time, we've talked about a few things that make a great Olympic event. The amount of skill it takes to play the game, how well the game is known outside the community in the form of brand recognition and marketability, and how people are watching it. Well, World of Warcraft has all this in spades. Crowned the best-selling MMORPG of all time, WoW has become a household name. Believe it or not, there's a very popular competitive eSports tournament with WoW, and that is the Arena World Championship, where teams compete in head-to-head death matches with these characters they have made. If you're looking for a game that has literally spawned other top-performing esports like Dota 2, then look no further than World of Warcraft. Hearthstone. While we've had our fun talking about these exciting games, we do have to talk about a common fact. Not all esports are created equal. Some bring in the crowd and others are super marketable, but there's more to an esport than audience and marketability. So let's talk about Hearthstone. While Hearthstone is revolutionizing the TCG landscape and bringing in big bucks with every new expansion, there's still a lot to be desired when looking at Hearthstone. For starters, the mechanics and interactions are a lot less robust than its competitors like Magic the Gathering. The things people look for in an Olympic-level game is one where RNG and random chance is minimized, and skill is maximized. We're still aware that in games like Magic, there's still random chance, but in Hearthstone, there's far too much to call it a game of skill versus a game of chance. Call of Duty. There is a pretty good reason not a lot of pro players play Call of Duty. It's simply not optimized for real competitive play. Let's take a look at some of the positives that Call of Duty brings. It's a franchise nearly everyone knows. It's a franchise that just craps out money, and yet many pro players avoid it like the plague. Why? Well, for starters, the franchise is way too inconsistent with a new game being released every year. So while yes, the franchise has made billions for being an annual release, it's also why few people take it seriously as an esport. Most of the games mentioned in this video are largely centered around one installment where gamers practice day in and day out to get better. How could they keep up if a new game is released every year? Overwatch. Now you might be surprised to see Overwatch on the list of esports to not be recommended for the Olympic Games, but bear with us and consider the following. If we look at what makes a successful MOBA, you want a variety of viable heroes and champions and a healthy meta where each character has strengths and weaknesses, but is also viable in some aspect for competitive play. What you want from a shooter is tight controls and precision. Trying to marry these two ideas is nearly impossible, and Overwatch has managed to do just that for a casual fun game to play with your friends. Even Blizzard admits they're putting fun first when it comes to Overwatch, which is why they take input for making hero adjustments based on the larger casual player base rather than streamers and professionals that play the game. Mix this in with the overall stagnant metagame and you can see why Overwatch would just not fit in as an Olympic-level sport. FIFA. So this next one is gonna be a doozy. As we already mentioned, soccer might not be the most amazing sport for Americans, but for the entire rest of the planet, it's like a religion. So it's no wonder that on top of being the most popular sport in the world, it's included in the Summer Olympics, and there's even a FIFA World Cup tournament every 4 years. Now, FIFA is also a popular game with new installments produced each year like Madden and NHL. But we won't talk about pros practicing a new game every year. Instead, we want to look at the oversaturation of football. When you look at how prevalent football is in the world, does it really need to be included twice in the Olympics? Do we need real soccer and FIFA eSports too? I would wager even the most hardcore FIFA fans would admit there's too much soccer in the Olympics already. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. We have to admit, we are ending on a high note with perhaps the most controversial pick for an esport not to be included in the Olympic Games, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or PUBG. It just recently got off early access and has quickly taken over as one of the most popular shooters in nearly a decade, rivaling the legacy of CSGO. However, you know what they say, a star burning twice as hot burns twice as fast, and you only need to scratch a little bit under the surface to see PUBG's flaws. For starters, the game's core mechanic, looting nearby houses, is almost entirely random. For this to be an Olympic sport, the game needs to be as skill-based as possible, and looting in the whole Battle Royale genre is just so RNG-based, there's not really any way to change that. Perhaps it's too soon to tell, and maybe we're just beginning to see the potential PUBG has for a competitive game, but the road to the Olympics is a long way off for this game. Those were 10 of the best esports games we think should be included in the Olympics, and 5 we think are better left out. What do you think? What esport should be a part of the Olympic Games? Do you agree with our picks? Let us know down in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to The Gamer for all the latest in gaming. Thanks for watching.